General and the Artistic Director of the New Orleans Opera.
I'm Brad Dalton, and I'm a stage director who is staging Carmen for the New Orleans Opera.
And I had the pleasure of meeting Brad, initially over the phone, about 15 years ago when the New Orleans Opera decided to produce A Streetcar Named Desire, which was just being premiered by the San Francisco Opera. And Brad was the assistant director on that production to the great Colin Graham. And I had talked with Colin about coming to New Orleans to stage the piece, and then I thought for a while that Brad might actually be the assistant on our production as well, but his schedule changed. And so we ended up coming back together many years later through A Streetcar Named Desire, which we produced in Michigan last season.
Exactly, right.
So I thought I was so taken with Brad's command of theater that we were doing this Carmen to open our season, and I invited him to join us as the stage director for this production. So now we are here in New Orleans working on this masterpiece.
Exactly.
Well, Brad and I started discussing the Carmen production, and each tossing ideas into the ring and reviewing our respective approaches to it. It might seem obvious to state this to people who are familiar with the opera, but its original version was as an opera comique. That does not mean a funny opera. It is a certain style of theater in which you use spoken dialogue. And for a long time, well over a century, the work was produced with some recitative. And now when you produce, you face certain choices. And that is, are you going to use the original spoken dialogue, or are you going to do the performances using son recit, which was contrived after the world premiere of the piece. One fun addition, though, Brad, is to know that Ernst Giraud, who set these dialogues to music, was from New Orleans.
No.
And so we do have a tie to Dr. Carmen. And then after that, join me and just share
Well,
some.
I have a designer that I've worked with, and he became included in the process in terms of taking some things which were existing in another form, and we began to adapt them into the atmosphere that we wanted for early 19th century Seville. And slowly over a series of time and meetings and input and adding things, and we've created a new production for New Orleans of Carmen. It has never been seen before. It's very beautiful. It's very picturesque and very true to the period. And so this is a new Carmen, and we've been having a wonderful time rehearsing it.
Right. Yeah. We have a very strong cast. We've had a wonderful creative team with our scenic designer and creating this new, absolutely, restatement of the opera.
Right.
You know, Carmen is so frequently performed, people are always looking for a new angle.
Right.
I was doing some research not too long ago, and two of the most recent ones placed it in the 1920s and in the 1960s, and actually an additional one in the 1980s.
Right.
So it's like any great universal opera story is pretty malleable, pretty practical to restate in whatever age you want, because it tells these universal truths.
I know that in relating the story to my friends who are not opera goers, a lot of them immediately relate to the idea of entering a dysfunctional relationship based on perhaps things from their lives that are still shadows for them. Because I think Don José and a sort of an eternal mythic idea that we fall prey to our shadows. I suppose you could say in Streetcar Named Desire that Blanche enters the stage with a big shadow, and that shadow destroys her, the unlived life of her inner life. You know, a lot of the opera, people don't know that José has actually committed a crime of passion before the curtain goes up. He's committed a murder over a simple gambling game, but he is within, discovers a side of himself and explores that to his own destruction in the opera, and I think that's why we come to the show. why we come to operas, is to see the full engagement of characters that are following a path of that walks a razor's edge, and through that we gain understanding about our own lives. So I think it's a very beautiful, I mean, the story is the most, the idea of passionate love, uncontrollable passionate love, and what happens to us, we lose our reason through that love, is something everyone can understand. Besides having probably the most beautiful score you could ever hope for in an opera. It's the most filled with tunes. Everyone always hears the Toreador song and thinks, that's what that's from, you know. There's so many beautiful tunes.
Well, and the characters are very rich. It is Don José's story, in spite of the fact that the opera is named after Carmen. And yet she remains, though unchanged throughout the story, she remains one of the most fascinating opera characters on the stage. She is a gypsy, so she holds a body of superstitious beliefs about destiny and about death that she lives through. But she says, l'amour est un oiseau rebelle. Love is a free bird, and that is her personal mantra. And so she feels that destiny guides her, that this body of attitude and belief is what governs her. And she has this encounter with this naive, as she herself expresses it, naive young recruit that has been sent to the Seville regiment as punishment for this card game violence.
Right.
And it leads him down this long path of destruction. And yet she remains the center of attention almost constantly.
It's true.
And holds our attention, even though she is a constant. And we watch everything around her affected by her. It fascinates me that with a pivotal, almost iconic figure, by iconic I mean the term femme fatale, is exactly what Carmen is. When she steps on the stage, every eye in the house is on her, male and female. And we learn about him. She has one of the greatest entrance arias in opera. Who else gets to walk on the stage after everyone is saying, where is she? Why isn't she here? We're waiting for you. And she comes out and says, here's who I am. So it's fun for its presentational aspects of it. But then I think the stage director's job, and one which you do so magnificently, is to peel away those layers of the onion. Exactly. Once we see the entire character, then you say, what is it that's under this bit of skin and under this one? So.
Exactly. And one of the things that Bizet and the creators of the opera did that's such a brilliant addition to the opera was creating a character of Micaela. We have the exact opposite of what Carmen is. We have a woman which represents traditional values, traditional living, which is an envoy of the messages from José's mother. And we get a kind of, as Robert says in the piece, when she appears, we hear what Robert calls church music. We hear tradition, we hear the call of home and respectability and reasonable living. And I think one of the most brilliant scenes is when Micaela bravely forges her way into the mountains and the lair of the gypsies, and then she appears with a message from José's mother that she's dying, and Carmen is pushing José away, and he's fighting with Carmen and Micaela. You have these two women. He's literally, as Robert says, we're stripping away the layers. He's just being ripped apart in front of our eyes. And one of the things that's interesting musically about the piece, I hear at least, in the form of it, is that I've always thought that it starts, well, it does start very lightly, like just an operetta, like The Merry Widow, like something very, very light, and by the end, in the writing of Bizet, there's a kind of excoriating factor that always sounds dark and existential, and on a plane lie these two characters battling out, almost like Wozzeck. I always think that José has descended into this mad state of passion, and I think that's very exciting to witness. That's for me a challenge to work with the José to find that journey Because like Robert says, you know, Carmen is the same, but José is making a descent and being ripped apart in front of our eyes, which is what we enjoy watching in the theater.
And speaking of the tenor, I'm delighted that Brian Email is the Don José for our production. Many locals know Brian and have followed his career, and he has won some prestigious awards, one from Covent Garden last season and the season before from the Metropolitan Opera. So he is truly on the world stage and singing beautifully. The casting of Carmen is always difficult for the tenor. And there is a saying in the opera world, it takes 3 tenors to sing Don José, because of exactly what you referenced, Brad, and that is it starts with a kind of sunny laziness in the town square of Seville, and where everyone sits around and says it's awfully boring out here, and we amuse ourselves by smoking and playing cards and things like that. But once we meet the character of Don José and we meet Micaela, the purity of their affection for one another and the simplicity and the lightness of the lyricism is very much in evidence. And it is carried through in the singing of their music. And then in the second act, we see the intensity grow. He sings the famous flower aria, and that is about the flower that Carmen threw at him that he carried next to his heart for the time he was in prison for her. And then the third act comes, and it takes a quantum leap in terms of dramatic intensity, that moment where you're talking about being torn between Carmen and Micaela and the threats and the dynamism of that scene. And then there is the towering anger of the last scene, where he has now been on the lam from the law, the military. He is going back to prison. He was a participant in a murder of an officer. He has abandoned his post, his honor. He is a desperate man. And when he comes back face to face with her again, the emotional strength that it takes for those scenes is yet another giant step up. So those 3 tenors that you need in one
exactly
to sing the role. And Brian, of course, will do a marvelous job.
Absolutely.
I'm also delighted to introduce to our local audience Geraldine Chauvet. She comes to us from France. She has distinguished herself in this role in Europe and will also be singing it very soon at the Washington National Opera. So, and also has dates in Dallas and in San Francisco and places like this. So again, a person sharing the major stages of the world and sharing her talent here with us.
Absolutely. She's everything you could want in a Carmen, and a pleasure to work with, and I think audiences are going to be thrilled by the 2 of these great artists together, Geraldine and Brian, as well as an amazing supporting cast.
It is an
absolutely perfect. Well, Robert has cast it so wonderfully that each person has so much to offer in their character. It's quite exciting, very exciting.
It is, and we have chosen to do the spoken dialogue version to reiterate that point. Sometimes that's challenging for non-native French-speaking artists, but it's the truth of the matter is, I think anyone that has familiarity with languages realizes it's not unique to French, but also to German and Italian and Czech and Russian and everything else that we sing in. So it's nice, in fact, to have native French speakers in your cast, because if nothing else, they can also help the Americans with truly idiomatic pronunciation, although all of our cast is pretty experienced and they work well. And one of the marvelous things about this opera is the power of its music.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you mentioned the beauties of it, and truly it is one of the richest musical scores, not just having been elevated to the level of popular culture like the Torero song, but there's an Italian style that we talk about, verismo, realistic, and the French have vérité, and this is, for me at least, the most realistic of the French operas. When you talk about the fallibility of the characters, and it makes them more interesting. It's because we do see them as real human beings and not cardboard characters. Even Michaela changes.
Yes.
For all of her purity and simplicity and her suppleness and ease in being good, when she goes into the gypsy camp and confronts Carmen and Don Jose, she has great strength, and she steps up and says, "Come with me. You need to do this." And this is a girl, a young girl, 17 years old according to the score, who leads him to what she thinks might be safety as well, only to find out that he is so far gone in his infatuation. But they're real people, I guess, is what we're talking about. They're interesting, real people. And I think for a stage director, that gives you a lot to play with.
A lot more to play with. And it's interesting for me, I think, even looking at Michaela's aria, when she appears in the mountains, it's to realize how brilliant this is, because it's a moment of someone who believes they can achieve a journey, and when they come face to face with it, they have a moment of fear. I'm not the person I thought I was. I thought I could complete this journey. What is within me? I'm surprised at who I am. I tell myself I'm strong, and now I face my fear. I think, every moment of Carmen is filled with this kind of questionings about things that are, in this sense, an extraordinary situation, but which are part of our daily life in all situations, large and small. And I think that's why it continues to thrill audiences.
And I think always will.
And always will.
It is truly one of those works that speaks to every generation and to every culture. And the universal element of it is part of its genius of creation, and the details of it are applicable to so many different situations. So, if a person is not experienced with opera, Carmen is certainly an easy point of entry. And if you are experienced with opera, and especially with Carmen, then you are always looking for the new interpretation that gives you pause to think, I never thought about that detail before, and suddenly this makes a little more sense. So it's an awfully rich work for us, one that is praised for its music, that obviously we find infectious in its drama, and it's a treat for the performers, and we hope that we share that enthusiasm for it with you as a listener. So come to the New Orleans Opera performances of Bizet's Carmen, and I promise you, you will leave singing the Torrid.
Great.